Do you remember growing your first $900 tomato and thinking, gosh, if I just had gone to the grocery store, it would have been way cheaper? Yeah, same. But we are not doing that anymore. Welcome to the Food, Farm, and Finance Podcast. I'm your host, Austin Graff, and together we are going to build our farms, homesteads, and gardens without destroying our finances. So let's get that bag of soil and money. Welcome to the Food Farm Finance Podcast. I am your host, Austin Graff, and today we are talking about the most riveting subject you have ever had the opportunity to lay ears upon. And that is, how do you find cheap land? How do you afford economical land if you're looking to build a farm or buy a homestead? And we are gonna get into it. But first and foremost, what I would like to say, I am a firm believer of grow where you are planted. Meaning, if you have an apartment, if you have a small space, there are so many things you can do and grow to achieve your gardening, homestead, and farming dreams right in that space. So do not let space discourage you. Just have to be a little more innovative, okay, honey bun? And let me tell you, if anyone can do it, it's you, because you are a brassy, sassy, intelligent person who is listening to this podcast in their free time. So I believe in you, and you should believe in you too. But if you need a little bit more space to branch out, this podcast episode is going to be for you as we explore creative solutions to finding land. Because if you have been looking, you know, oh my gosh, it is so stinking expensive. Now, I live in Tennessee, and I'm convinced my proximity to Nashville and its booming economic market has destroyed the chance for anyone in my area to buy large tracts of land. With that said, here is me sitting on 26 acres. Okay, land baron, chill out, calm down. That's right, call me baron, because this land be barren. But I wanted to create this episode to help people, regardless of where they're at. I know some markets are cheaper than others. Some markets are more expensive than others. So I've created some solutions, and these are not for everybody, but let's get into it. But before we do that, a message from our sponsors. Today's sponsor is me, of course, because this podcast still is not cool enough or fancy enough to have a sponsorship. But if you happen to be a land baron yourself and very wealthy and just have spare cash, you could totally sponsor this just for fun. That would be a laugh, a hoot, a holler. I would love it. And if you are one of the listeners, when I do get a sponsor, be sure and support them, because that is how we make sure this information stays free. All right? Love you all. Now back to the episode. Okay, so we know that finding land can be a challenge. We know it's difficult for it to be affordable. So I wanted to outline a few really unique ways. I've got loads of statistics, and y'all know I love me some numbers. I've been doing a lot of research on this episode, which is exciting. One thing you will not hear from me in this episode is average land cost per acre, because it varies so widely, and so all of this is very, very distinct to the area that you happen to be living in. So I didn't want to give y'all some crazy expectations, right? Because land in Tennessee is going to be vastly different prices than land in Washington. So let's get into it. But first, I want to enter with a little anecdote about my property. And that is to say, understand how much you need. Okay. You see, I was starting a flower farm, and that is actually why I bought land. I had a flower farming business. Prior to that, I was leasing land from my family. And I bought this farm because I needed space. I needed to expand, all that stuff. I bought 26 acres. All right. If you have never bought land before, 26 acres is not a small chunk. Now, it's small compared to these farms that have 2,000 acres. But the thing is, I only needed about 2 acres to grow what I was growing and to grow my business. Beyond that, it was just extra space that I had mortgaged for funsies. And let me tell you, a 26 acre mortgage for funsies is not... It's not funsies. So I think that's probably my first tip, first and foremost, before we get into anything deep and detailed, is consider, first and foremost, truly how much space do you need? Are you just wanting to have acres for fun, for recreation? If so, that's fine, but you probably don't need as much as you think. Are you going to start market gardening, like a little flower farm, for example? Probably only going to be able to cultivate and handle a couple acres yourself. If you're starting a cattle operation, you're going to need a lot of grass, a lot of ground. Okay, go for it. There's a lot to consider, but really know how much space you need. If your plan is to have a microgreens farm and you buy 50 acres and you end up using a 300 square foot barn on your property to grow microgreens year round, you really didn't need all that land and all that space. So just take into consideration and take inventory of your goals and what you're wanting to do with the property. Are you just wanting a little backyard garden? Do you really need all of that space? And that alone makes it a lot more approachable. We just have to really consider, how much do we really need? And a lot of times it's way less than you think. I know for myself, that certainly was the case. But enough about me being like a boring dad and being like, hey, do this, giving big dad energy. Let's get into some of the best ways, in my opinion, to find affordable land. Number one is a lease to own type situation, seller financed from farmers. Now you're like, okay, tell me more, sir. Well, here's the deal. According to a 2022 census, an agricultural census, and yes, here's the data that I love so much, 58.1 years old. That is the average age of a U.S. farmer today. Now, that's knocking right up to 60. And I would wager by 2024, we're seeing that number increase a little bit because, that data is 2 years old. So think about that. Think about a 60-year-old in your life. Think about, do you think they're just like really rocking and rolling? Do they want to work 20 more years? Well, if they're a farmer, probably, because farmers are obstinate, stubborn, and they just do. And if they have the right machinery in place, a lot of times they can and they will. But I want you to think about that, because the next number I'm going to tell you is going to be mind-boggling. Now, I've done a lot of research and nothing is definitive. So I cannot find a single solid answer, because it's not like people are, filling out census data for this. But it is estimated that potentially up to 77% of those farmers have no succession planning for their farm. What that means is there is nobody in line to take up and step up and move up in that farm once that farmer retires. That's so many. I cannot explain to you how many that is. That is actually scary. And what I think a lot of people really miss out on with stuff like this is farmers really love their land. They want to see someone take on their land that has similar values to them or wants to preserve that land as a farm. Now, there are definitely farmers that are like, woohoo, let's sell it to a developer. Let's get money and move to the Bahamas. And you know what? Good on you. Enjoy it. If you did it, I kind of admire it. Maybe that'll be me one day. Who knows? But I think there are so many people that are tied to that land. Once you work land and once you have built that land up, you form a very emotional attachment to it. And it's really sad to lose that land. It's like grieving a loved one. So knowing that that land is being left to someone who admires it and is as passionate about it as you are is an amazing thing to feel inside. So find a farmer, right? Literally go find a farmer, work for that farmer, and then try and offer a purchase situation where you literally do seller financing with that farmer and buy the farm off that farmer. And what's amazing about that option is you would have on-farm training. You would learn about it. And that farmer might have some peace of mind that, he's leaving his property or she's leaving her property in really, really good hands. So that is my first and foremost kind of radical option. But I don't think it's very radical, because according to the 2018 USDA data, 89.7% of U.S. farms are small farms. And that means they are small family-run farms, comparable to like the size of my farm, for example. And they produce about 21% of all agricultural products. So the largest share of farmers in America
have small farms. So it's not like you're going to have to go out and buy 2,000 acres. And these small farmers are passionate as well. They're incredibly passionate about their land. That's actually how I ended up with my property. And I think it's a really, really excellent option to consider that. The seller financing also helps make sure interest rates are something that are affordable for you. And I feel like a lot of farmers are probably willing to do that and give a good interest rate if they know the buyer and care about the buyer and want to see the buyer do well. Plus, you're going to get all of that wisdom. On a side note, just because I think it's interesting, only 5.5% of farms in the US are mid-sized family farms, according to this 2018 summary. So that is an area as well, but 2.7 are large family farms. And then interestingly, 2.1% are commercially held entities, meaning they are not private family farms. They are big corporations, but I think a lot of us think that there's a lot more of these big corporations than there are, and maybe that data has definitely gone up. It is 6 years old, but I think that's really, really interesting and a lot of opportunity to continue supporting small farms. If that's something you're interested in doing, creating a small farm, creating a homestead, this might just be the way you might consider doing it, right? It could be way lower upfront cost. It's a great opportunity to build equity. And like I said, it provides a lot of upswing for very, very favorable loan terms and conditions. And you're going to end up with loads and loads of knowledge that farmer is willing to share. And I think that is incredible and so powerful. Next up, we have squatting. Not actually squatting. Like, please don't be squatting on people's property. I don't really think that's a great overall business plan or strategy or great way to formulate residency. I have read this article about this lady who literally lived in this house for like 10 years as a squatter, and she maintained the property and everyone just thought it was her property. And like right before the expiration of like when she would be able to like say, this is my property, the landowner came back and they were like, no. And then they got it back. And like, that is a yag spike situation. So if you're going to be investing in it, be sure you have it. But what I mean is, let's talk about land vacancy. So there was a 2016 survey of US national cities, right? So cities all across the US. And of those cities, it's estimated 16.7% of land was vacant within those cities, meaning people didn't live there, people weren't there. It's like lots of empty lots, etc. Now, I know that's 10 years ago, 8 years ago, if you could do math. Like, I obviously cannot. But there are oftentimes a lot of vacant city lots in different areas of the city. So if you are someone who is in the city and you are not actively looking for buying an entire farm, I think this is a really, really excellent opportunity, right? So there are lots of legalities, right? You need to contact the city planning department, the tax assessor office. You could even contact local nonprofits in the area that specialize in stuff like urban greening and community development. But I think that's a really good option. And I think a lot of the community gardens that we're seeing are coming from vacant lot situations like this. And I've known quite a lot of farms that have spread and built up in vacant lots. And of course, they go through the necessary practice. They purchase the land, etc. So it's all legal. It's not just like staking a claim and putting your little flag down. But I think this is a really unique opportunity, especially if you're not needing huge tracts and swaths of land. If you're just wanting space for a garden, consider this. And I know this is very circumstantial. It won't work in every single city. There are really hot real estate markets in a lot of areas, and vacant land isn't just like everywhere. So this would, depend on your city and your location. But I think it's a really powerful way to look at things. And you don't have to have this 50-acre farm in Connecticut with like horse stall barns. Like, you can literally have this 1/4-acre property that you turn into an urban oasis if that is what you want to do. So I really think that's a great option, a great solution. And that brings me to something else. It's called family and friends. seriously, when I got my garden journey started and I started flower farming professionally, I was in a backyard of a family friend. And then I was in the backyard of my brother. And then I was in the backyard of my parents. And I moved around. And what it did was kept my land cost incredibly low. Now, I was hoping that at one point I would be able to buy one of those little chunks of land off of one of my family or friends. But that's not what happened. It didn't work out. I ended up buying a nicer piece of property, in my opinion, way over here. But I really, really learned so much during that time. And I think if you're just beginning gardening, if you're just beginning farming, even if you like want to get some goats and put them on a little piece of property at a neighbor's or a friend's, I think that gives the framework for like, do you want to do this? Because it can suck, right? Like you're out there, it's August, you're sweating, you're trying to plant turnips, not in August, but it's rough. It's not easily done. So I would absolutely suggest trying it out in someone's space. If you don't have space yourself, try it out in someone else's space. See if it's worth the time. See if it's worth the effort. See if it's something you want to do. I think that is the best way. Literally, just borrow it. Be like, hey, can I borrow your land? And they'll be like, no problem. I don't use that. Maintain it. Do tradesies. If you mow my lawn, you can use 1/4 of an acre to grow some flowers. Like, seriously, it is an amazing opportunity, especially if you are just getting out and you don't know what you want to do. Literally, just find a place. You want chickens? Put them on your neighbor's property. You'll figure it out, I promise. Last, but certainly not least, and this is maybe one of the most important, grants and USDA farm funding. All right, so if you know you're going to buy a farm, there are so many potential grants out there. You have the USDA Farm Service Agency, and what they do is they can help beginner farmers and ranchers develop. So now that doesn't always look like grants, where grants are basically, if you do this and you follow the boxes, we will give you this money and you don't owe us anything. A lot of their programs are more loan programs where it's, if you do this, if you follow the boxes, we will give you good terms, good rates, for, first time farm buyers, etc. So there are tons of those options that are subsidized by the government to help make sure these things are affordable and you can affordably purchase farmland. A lot of those loans for land like that for first-time farmers also allow you to borrow a set amount for infrastructure, which makes those kind of unique in the sense that if you are buying a piece of property for like a house for your primary residence, for example, when you buy that piece of property, you are not supposed to be borrowing for more than the home appraises for. Well, in this instance, it allows you to potentially borrow more for infrastructure projects like a business loan, but it's a farm loan, so farm ownership loans. And they can be really tailored to the specific farmer that's involved. And what's also interesting is these loans can have longer terms than standard mortgages. They can be like 40-year long terms, which, do I recommend that personally? No. But if that's what you need to get out and do this, that's really up to you. As a finance budgety kind of guy, I do not really love interest unless it's incredibly low. I do not love long repayment terms because the longer repayment the term, the more money you are ultimately paying for that loan, because that interest and that principal, it just keeps going. It's like, oh my gosh, it's never gonna end. But there's a lot of resources for this. And down payment assistance is one as well. So definitely look into these grants. Now, the government level beginner farmer grants for loans and subsidies like that are just not my favorite. But there are a lot of really smaller, like amazing grants, like National Young Farmers Coalition has young farmer grants, and they will literally give you small amounts of money that you don't ever have to pay back. And then one of my favorite things is state level programs. Now, I don't know that all states have this, but one of the things that I love about Tennessee is the way we support agriculture. So Tennessee has a grant program here, and basically it is where you go and you take classes on whatever business level of agriculture you're interested in. So if you want to keep bees, you can take a beekeeping course. If you want to keep goats, you can take a goat keeping course. If you want to be an orchardist, you can go learn about orcharding. I don't know if orcharding is what it's called, but there's all of these things, right? And what happens is once you take these classes, if you become a master, which means you've taken a couple credit hours and they are free, they do not cost much money at all. There might be a light registration fee, but I'm pretty sure most of these programs are free. And what happens afterwards, if you meet all the requirements, you are eligible for cost sharing. So for example, there is a barn on my property right now from a cattle farmer that did a cost sharing program to build the barn. And they only had to pay for 50% of the hay barn that is on this property. And the state subsidized the other 50%. They paid back the other 50%, which was huge, right? Like the cost of a barn is incredibly expensive. It translated to thousands and thousands of dollars in earned equity on this property. So I think that smaller state level grants is where I would start. And maybe they're not the best for getting land at the beginning, but these are really powerful things to know about, because when I was telling you about the farm ownership loans, where you can actually take out more money so that you can build infrastructure on your property, if you have a state program that offers to assist with infrastructure, you would be able to take out significantly less in loans for that loan and still have the same infrastructure, effectively cutting back loads of interest. So I would always start there. Go to your local county extension office. Most counties in the US have one. I'm pretty sure. I know Tennessee is littered with extension offices, and they will be able to help you and point you in the right direction of literally any grants and subsidies that are available. So I would definitely start there on my journey if I was wanting to be a landowner and buy a farm and start really, doing the homestead thing. Like, I think land is the biggest hurdle when people are trying to come into the agricultural space, whether they're wanting to build a giant farm, build a homestead, or just garden. I think it can be the biggest hurdle for people. And I think by doing a little bit of research and researching the grants available, the loans available, and really thinking about the property that you're looking for and being intentional, you can have a really, really great experience with shopping for land and finding something that really, really fits. So my last little thing that I would like to say is I would consider investing in unique land investments. And what I mean by that is looking at my property. 15 acres are considered floodplains. And those 15 acres are absolutely not great agricultural land. They're great for hay, they're great for, certain things. But in general, I can't farm flowers on there. I can only graze my livestock a certain percentage of the year because, flood waters. And it only happens once or twice in a given season. So like maybe 1 or 2 times a year, but that is substantial enough to where you've got to be really, really cautious and intentional. Now, would I have bought this property if I had fully known that and realized it? I didn't know how much it was going to flood. So I can safely say I might have thought twice. But here's the implications of buying it, right? So by buying it, my land price overall per acre was a lot cheaper. And I have a strategy for how I want to use that land and how I want to monetize that land and make sure it works for me. Additionally, in the state of Tennessee, if you farm over 15 acres and have a consecutive tract of land that is 15 plus acres, you are eligible for greenbelt taxes. What that means is in order to incentivize green land space and agricultural land, they will cut your tax rate on each of those acres in order to help you maintain the property. So my property is greenbelt. So while I have 15 acres, that aren't maybe prime farming real estate, they make sure that the portion of my property that is prime is also falling within Greenbelt because I have that consecutive land. So that's a big thing, right? Taxes add up. And when you're buying bigger tracts of land, let me tell you, they get big fast, right? That is one way in which it makes sense for me. Also, as someone who's a flower farmer, it really doesn't affect me too much because as something I look to invest in is woody perennials, for example. A lot of those do really, really wet areas really, really well. So I can expand into those growing zones and knowing that they're going to be flooding occasionally, but those plants are going to thrive and, if anything, actually help with the flooding situation down in that area while still producing a profitable crop. I do think if you can come up with a really, really intriguing business case or use case for kind of questionable pieces of land, then there's a lot of upswing for it and you can do so much with it, so much more than you think. So I'm just going to leave on that note, basically saying that it doesn't have to be this perfect vision that you always dreamed of, these gorgeous rolling hills, this 90-acre property, right? It can be a little quirky. It can be 26 acres, 15 of which are underwater once every other year, knowing that you have a way that you're going to use it, capitalize on it, and make it work for you. You just need to know in advance that that is something you have to account for. And by doing so, I ended up with a piece of property that not only cost less for me to maintain in the sense of property taxes, but it also cost less to purchase in total overall acreage. And now I have 15 acres, and those 15 acres can be hayed. They can grow these hardy woody perennials. They can be seasonally grazed upon. There are so many ways to use this space, and it was cheap because conventional development, conventional people who are wanting to put 70 houses in this area weren't able to build on that land because it didn't make sense for them, but it could make a load of sense for your farm. So definitely consider less than prime real estate. So I hope all of this kind of helped you. You know, when you're doing this, if you really want to buy land, do your due diligence, right? Like I was recommending you start squatting, and really I don't want you to start squatting. What I want you to do is look at creative solutions and maybe potential areas that you could, buy a little bit of land here, buy a vacant lot, etc. So I don't want you squatting. I don't want you doing anything illegal. I do not recommend that. Also, anything you heard in this episode is not tax or legal advice. Do your own education and all of your own research. Well, don't do your own education. Get educated outside of me, okay? Get educated on this subject and start doing the research and really start trying to figure out what makes sense for you. And I think a lot of times you'll find that just a nice little home with an acre yard is going to have so much more space than you think. Go out there, stand on what an acre is. An acre is a ton of land, a ton of growing space, a ton of garden space. You definitely have chickens, maybe even some goats, like all the gardens you ever want, right? So get used to doing more with less, and you will be able to afford more. And honestly, those are kind of the properties you want anyways, right? You want to buy those properties that need a little bit of love, need a little bit of rehab, and then you can grow and nurture with them. And so will your value and your net worth as you put in sweat equity to turn these properties into something that is worthwhile to other people. So I hope this was helpful. Definitely research some grants, research some alternative land options, and, let me know if you buy something. As always, this podcast needs your help, so please share it. Tell your friends about it. Tell your mama about it. Tell your bestie's mama about it. I don't really care who you tell, but, say nice things if you're going to say something. And until next time, we out.